Good morning, everyone. How are we today? Let me turn the music down. We are live again here. Let's get this music down. This is too much music here. Let's get this good vibe. Good morning. Welcome to Wake Up and Ship More. I am your host, Joe. I am part of DevHub. I am one of the moderators there. I am also a software developer. I've been working in enterprise. I've been working in startups. I've had my own startups. And I'm actually running a project here on Near Protocol as well called ShardDog. And so we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff around actually building and what it means to do that. If you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, we talked about app architecture early on, and we talked about some of the different pieces of that, blending some Web 2 and Web 3, and we will go back to some of that for sure. What we are looking to do today is talk a little bit about like what actually is an MVP. And everyone has a little bit definition of an MVP. And when I say MVP, I mean a minimal viable product. And where does that fit into your building sense? So this has become a popular term for like possibly investors, for when you're first kind of building, of what it starts to actually look like to get your product off the ground. And we're going to talk a little bit today about what that actually entails and what I feel from my own experience, someone who has been on all sides of it. I've been as the startup founder, I've been as the consultant, I have been as the outsider trying to help evaluate. I have been part of the person who has to sell it to the higher ups, and trying to get in, whether it's a new feature or whatever else. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like and how that ties into some of the stuff that maybe you might be building here on Near or building just anywhere. And so again, I don't want it, this isn't necessarily just blockchain or crypto specific, but this is something that I think is software development specific. But we'll talk about all the different pieces and why maybe sometimes it's different in Web3 and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about, let's get started here with this part here. We're going to actually set it up like this. Wrong setup. Here we go. So last time we talked about a couple different things about setup. We talked about the architecture, right? And then we talked a bit about, really early on of like, how do we actually make things really simple in our architecture? And that was gearing towards really for this discussion today of what is an MVP. Okay. So let's kind of jump into, what actually is an MVP first, and then we'll talk about like how do you start to actually build that and get that going. So when we talk about MVP, okay, so this is the three parts of this: of minimal viable product, and what does that really actually mean? So the minimal part is really something that I think gets kind of muddied depending on who you're talking to and who your audience is. So let's use an example first. Okay. So one of the examples I might have first is actually saying like, hey, I want to show off what our app is capable of. Again, we have this great idea. We want to show what it's capable of. And so the thing here is like, okay, like if I'm just trying to show off a feature set, how do I get from having nothing to just show off that feature set? And we don't want to necessarily overcomplicate that. So if I'm just trying to show how to, let's say I want to show how my software is going to, whether it's a mobile app, whatever website, is going to be able to display photos. Well, I just simply need to build a front end that is going to show and pull in the photo. And so that's a fairly simple thing because it's a singular feature, but it's not really doing anything. And so for me to really put effort and time into building that is not getting me to my goal of really showing off maybe what my software is. So the next question you have to start to ask yourself is like, well, what functionality with showing that photo needs to happen? So that's where you start to ask these questions. Okay. So the first question is always going to be is what is my goal? Okay. Now, your goal might be I'm trying to raise money. My goal might be I'm talking to investors. It might be that I want people to beta test my concept and I want people to give me feedback. Does my idea make sense? Because it may not, it may make sense, may not make sense. And so that might be that those goals are going to differ. And then from there is, basically is actually just a why. And so then the reason why I say why here is because for you as the builder, you have to really take a step back and think of like, well, why am I asking for feedback? Or what am I asking? Why am I asking for money now? Do I need money to get to the next spot? So is that who I'm going to actually go in? Yeah, I need to be able to show this to my investor. Or maybe I'm at a spot where like I don't even know if this is a good idea, and I just want someone to help validate that. And so you might say, well, why can't I just talk to people about my idea? Sometimes your idea is better shown than just talked about. And you'll see this sometimes in product building where you have a really great idea. When you're talking about it, maybe it sounds really great and you get people really excited, and then like you kind of like build the first version of it and people are like, this doesn't seem like anything useful. It's overly complicated. And people feel not great about what you just did, even though maybe talking about it, like your excitement overwhelms people, and so they buy into it. Where you can also have the reverse of that. You can have the reverse of it where talking about it maybe is a little bit difficult because it's a new idea, so you have nothing to compare it to. You don't have a way to reference what it is. So your why in this case is like, look, I don't have a reference point to show anyone. I want to have a minimal product that actually shows what I'm actually trying to do here. So that could be part of that as well. So the next question really is going to be here is like, what is my absolute, we'll say minimum, okay? So my absolute minimum to do something. And the reason why we want to understand that is because we're actually not going to build to the absolute minimum, because that's probably too far low. So again, I'll use my more recent product that I'm building as the example here. So on ShardDog, so we are a product that helps you. It's a marketing tool that helps you claim NFTs, but it's not about the NFT part of it. It's more about, again, essentially onboarding somebody into a community. So for us, when we want to show, if we were going to show an MVP now, there's a couple different things that we want to be able to show. One is at least some kind of simulation of the process to claim the NFT to be part of that group. Now, this is not about, for us, the product's not about minting NFTs, so we don't care so much about the actual act of minting. So my absolute minimum is I need to show you the claim piece of that. Okay. So now if I know that, I need to go one step further of, okay, the absolute minimum is I'm going to show you how to claim. So the next step is I need to maybe actually also show you what happens after you claim. And I can break that down into a way that's actually really fairly straightforward here. Okay. So in my MVP, I might have different versions of this. If I'm just trying to prove the concept of it and just show you what is possible, just like we talked about on the architecture ones, the first couple episodes, I can have my front end. Okay, so this is going to be maybe my website, right? A mobile app would be too much work to prove a concept. That's a lot of building, and there's a lot of different hoops you got to jump through to get people to see it on a mobile app. So this is where just a basic website makes a ton of sense. Then, now here's where it gets, I think you have to make a decision of like, what is my actual minimum part here? Do I really need to actually mint during the claim? So I have my claim process, right? Do I really actually need to mint? And I would argue in many situations, even though on most chains and everything else, you can have a test net, and so you can do it either, you can do it for free. You can not have to worry about the pressures of, spending money on mainnet and things like that. But the thing here is that like I don't, the minting part is to the side. It doesn't matter. I'm not trying to show you I know how to mint something. That's not what the product is, really. So this can actually just be simulated. It doesn't have to be real. And so I can actually just, simply just say, okay, we're going to have a simple call here, and it can even be a local call. It could just even be simulated in the front end that when I hit the button, that it seems like in the background that this is claiming. So this could just actually just be a loading screen, right? So now this is my actual minimum, right? So now here is my minimum is actually just the loading screen, not this part. Okay, then I want to show my success page. Okay, so again, using the example here of shard.dog as a very minimal piece of that, where again, the product is simply just, the minimum product is we want to allow you to onboard onto a community. And part of that process is, yes, claiming this NFT, but in the meantime, I don't need to show you all of that. That's irrelevant for what I'm trying to show you if I'm just trying to get the idea out there. So that's minimum version 1, where I don't have to go through all that. So I don't have to set up anything on testnet. I don't have to deploy a contract. I don't have to do anything else. I have just designed basically a working mock-up of what I'm trying to do to then go and show whomever I need to show it to get feedback. So maybe if I'm trying to raise money, I'm going to show it to an investor. Maybe I'm going to show it to, friends, family, whomever, just to say, hey, does this idea make sense to you? Whatever that might be. So now I have this small piece of software that doesn't really do much, just is again a living mock-up. Now the next step might be as well, maybe I need to actually prove that the infrastructure I'm trying to use is that. So maybe my goal is not actually just, hey, is the concept good? But part of my goal might be, hey, I want to actually show that building on this type of infrastructure will work. Or maybe I want to show that like my team, if you're on a team or if you're a solo dev, I have the ability to actually do what I'm talking about. So meaning that if I say I can build this on a blockchain, then awesome. Like, that's easy. I want to say, okay, how can I then show that? Because if I have no blockchain experience, or you don't know if I have that experience and I have nothing to prove that I can do it, my goal might be here, again, slightly different, of just showing off like, hey, let me provide to you proof of doing this process and actually minting and actually deploying a contract. And this can be on maybe testnet. So now again, if I'm using something, again, doesn't matter what chain we're talking about here. If I put this now part on testnet, and I'm actually going to actually mint something, right? So now this is my step 2. I'm still going to have a loading screen, but that has to do that. And then we go to success, right? So now all I've done is I've started to change, you know, a little bit of like the outcome of the app, it's still doing something pretty similar. I've added a little extra work here. I have this now minimal product. So now we can go, let's go another step further. Okay. My goal now might be is to actually raise money. And if my goal here is to now raise money and I want to show this to investors, I have something else that my absolute minimum might be a little bit different here. Okay. So my goal here is, okay, I want money and I want to be able to prove to investors that this is not only a good idea, that we can, so a couple things I need to be able to do here, right? I need to have the idea. Can I actually execute on it? Okay. And do people understand it? And that last one might seem kind of silly, but it's true that I have seen many times now where the idea seems good. You talk about the idea with someone, sounds good. You feel pretty good about it. And then they say, you say, how are you going to execute on it? And they have a way to show you, oh yeah, well, we're going to build this, we're going to build that. We have X, Y, and Z on our team to be able to help build something. Say, okay, great. And then you say, does you ask like, okay, who's the end user, right? Who's going to use this product? So say, oh, it's anyone can use the product. Great. How easily will somebody understand the product once they see it? And that becomes the question of, you can say any answer you want, but until you actually deliver something, you don't really have a good answer for that. Here's why. And this is, I'm going to step back a little bit and give a real world example of why this is important. Okay. So there have been, and again, this is going back in time, maybe before, I think some people were old enough to use internet computers, but before something like Facebook and other social media platforms, right, we had some other social media sites and type of things that were around. And so the concept of like connecting socially online has been around for a long time. And it was around pretty much in different forms since the beginning of what we know as the internet. As you come into, the 2000s, and there's all these different products that are, starting to do what we now recognize today as like social media. But they are, they're kind of clunky. They're not really well adopted. They have you can see they have the beginning of it. They have the bones of what will become in the future. But they're not really there yet. And to me, that's a great example of the idea is there, right? Like these people who were building at that time understood that like people are going to want to connect. Being able to build social online communities will be important. Being able to do that. And then what happened was the execution of it and how well people understood the use of it was not quite there yet. Part of it was technology, right? So some of the internet technology wasn't really caught up yet, and so that was part of that, and the cost of infrastructure and everything else. But the other side of it was when you would go into some of these apps and you'd go into some of these products, you didn't quite get the sense of like, okay, you could maybe kind of see it, but then you realized like it was maybe missing something that, and you, at the time you didn't know what, but like, it wasn't quite the tool that you wanted it to be to really connect. Then as more what we still have around today, the Facebooks, Twitter, um, eventually, later on, like things even like Snapchat and all those social medias that started to come out started to show like, hey, here are some different ways that we can execute on this idea that the people who are going to be our end user will start to understand what this is really doing. And so that's that's an important part of what your MVP actually is. So while this may seem trivial, of like, oh, well, of course they should understand it. Isn't that part of the idea? It's like, well, I would not jump to that conclusion. And so when you're building out, that initial product that, again, this is like a pre V1, it's like, can I put together something that will both show my idea, prove that I can execute, and make sure that my end user will understand what they're actually trying to use. It's sometimes a little bit more difficult than it first sounds. Okay. So again, I have to go back to what is my goal here? Okay. Why am I trying to do this today? Like why am I trying to do this? So I'm trying to raise money. Am I trying to just prove a concept, whatever it is, and then figure out like what my absolute minimum is. Okay. So let's take a little bit of a step back again here. And let me show you. I'm going to bring up something here. Hold on. Let me pull up. Here, hold on. Okay. Sorry for my hands there. I don't know what is going on here. Hold on a second. Oh, we gotta stop. I have a little bit of a technical issue trying to share that screen here. I don't know what's happening here. All right, I guess I can't share it today. So, okay. Well, we'll have to go back to that in a second. All right, here. So let's see if I can get this to show. All right, so let's just continue on this part of it. Maybe we can show that later. Okay. So now, if I know what my goal is, okay. So we'll go. We're gonna stick with the part of, okay, and I think this is probably most important for most people here. Is what is my idea? Can I execute? And do people understand? Okay. So what would actually come first? What's actually going to fit into some of the stuff here? All right, so my first thing is what is going to be, right, my front end for this MVP? And there's a couple paths that you can go. Okay. Now I will make the argument, and everyone will have some people will have a different opinion here. Your front end shouldn't just be just a mocked up thing. So if I'm gonna go and let's say use like Figma and do all these designs as my proof of concept, I would say it's not an MVP. That is what is proof of concept. That is a design that's a mock-up. I think those are great for maybe sometimes for people who need to see things in front of them more tangibly. People who want to actually, yeah, I guess the right term would maybe be like I need to visualize what I'm actually trying to build. And so the Figma, so here I'll make a note here. So right, so the idea of like a Figma, we're gonna say no, because that's not an MVP. It's not really anything. When people interact with something like that, the feedback that you'll actually really get is going to be maybe helpful on a couple parts. Maybe it's something like just visually to say, oh yeah, I like how this looks. I get the feel. But for you to really understand, like, do my users, uh, actually, uh, will my users actually get what I'm trying to do? A Figma's not going to cut it. I don't care how good it is. I don't care if you can click on buttons. It's not an MVP. Maybe it's helpful for an investor talk. Maybe it's helpful for, again, talking about maybe, again, just your idea here. But otherwise, I'm gonna say that for my experience, it's not going to be strong enough for that. So I need to have some kind of front end. Now, this is where I think you can actually have some different mileage in different ways. If my end product is a mobile app, building a mobile app can be a lot of work, in a lot of sometimes specialized work that maybe is not really necessary to show the idea in the execution and the understanding pieces of it. So maybe, even though I want to, let's say, maybe build a mobile app, actually having a website that is like my mobile app might be more than enough. Okay. So just having my website, will be one. And that's my front end. Okay. Now I have to think about what part of my idea do I need to actually show? So this is the functionality piece. Okay. And now I have to think about what functionality do I actually want to be able to get across to people that is critical that I actually build. Okay. So that's the part here that I want to make sure that I'm getting across to everyone, is that it is great and all to uh come through here and say, like, oh, like, from a functionality standpoint, I want to be able to do all these great things. We're gonna have AI in the background, and we're gonna have machine learning, and we're gonna do all these different things, and and it's going to solve all your problems. Great. That's overly complicated. That's not a product. You have to be able to show, like, what am I actually doing here? So my functionality really is going to be here of, like, again, you know, what are the main actions that have to happen, right? So, and I have to consider during my MVP, you know, do they have to be real, or can these actually be mocked? Now, here's the difference between the Figma on the front end being a mock versus the functionality and the actions being mocked. Okay. Now, if the functionality, I need to just show you how something is going to go from A to B to C in my app, then mocking that piece might actually be more than enough. And that's the part. So I might not have to show all of that. But, and so that's where I can say I can maybe just mock it. I can just have the example I was showing earlier of, like, I don't really have to actually mint the NFT. I can just show you the loading screen, and the assumption is that it's happening, and then we can get to there, because my functionality I really need to show you is from the claim, which is the claim page front end is A, the minting process again is B, but that functionality is an important way. I'm just going to be to C, which is the success page, and then wherever that leads you. So I need to show you that. So that's where that is important. But my action maybe need to be real. Maybe I can't mock them because I'm at a stage here where my MVP really needs to actually have users using it, and not just, like, it's not a demo. It's actually, like, I'm trying to get users to use it so I can get feedback in a larger group setting. And so This is an important piece where if I'm going to actually deploy this into the real world and say whether it's even it's a beta cohort or maybe it is just live to see how people respond to it, if I'm going to have people actually do things, I need my actions to be real. Um, Again, if I'm just showing it to a much smaller group of people, maybe again investors, whoever else, maybe I can mock up those actions. Okay, so here's this is part two. Okay, and then the next part would be is, and this is what gets missed a lot, is the feedback mechanism. Okay, and the feedback mechanism is really interesting because like there's a lot of different ways that this could actually go. So let me kind of lay this out for you. So feedback might be one part is here is like obviously if something goes wrong, right? Like can a user like message me or put in a ticket or something, right? So if something is wrong, it's for feedback, right? Okay. This is though where sometimes your MVP though actually has to have a bit more work in the background. And this is like super important. So what happens sometimes is during my MVP, you're so focused on like the visuals, you're so focused on like what's kind of functionality am I showing, like you forget some of the other stuff that maybe is actually a good amount of work to actually implement and put in. But you're trying to get out the door as fast as possible. And so you forget things like how do I give feedback? How does a user send in a ticket? How do I log these actions? How do I verify what feedback I'm getting actually is through there? And this is like a super complicated problem where I just I think that it's so easy to get caught up in like uh you're trying to just show off and you're just trying to bootstrap yourself and you don't maybe have a lot of things that and you say, oh, adding in all this logging and now I got to add maybe a database and I have to do this and all of that. um I will say from experience, it is worth the time to put in that. It's a similar argument to people who are like, do I need to build a test suite for everything? And you can make that same kind of argument here a little bit of like, well, maybe I don't really need a full test suite and so we can always do that later. And you can, and I don't always write test suites by any means. I am not great at that part. But that is an internal process of how I then ship and deploy code. That is not my MVP. So this here though is how my end users are doing that. I'm building, and when I'm doing an MVP, I'm getting this in people's hands. My software as a product, right? So we're thinking this as a product. I need to be able to get proper feedback of my product. So I really want to emphasize here that like the extra work has to go into things not about your internal processes per se. That might be, again, that might be a luxury that you maybe have to be able to do, but I really want to be able to focus on like, can I actually like know what's happening inside my app? And if I don't know what's happening inside my app, I need a way to do that. So there are services out there. There are third-party services out there. Some of them are very expensive, just to be heads up, that will give you like tons of feedback on like how people are using your site. Obviously, you can use things if it's just a website. Google Analytics, right, is free to sign up. You can track what things are being clicked on. You can track what different buttons are being push, where people go, things like that, how much time they spend on the website. That's an easy one to put in there. It's fairly lightweight. You can do something like that. But you also might want to, again, have some internal stuff too that is based around logging. And that logging is going to be like your APIs. So if you are having actions that are real, especially, like that's something that, I want to have full logging for. And so I want to be able to actually show to people, you know, internally, and then maybe even to possibly invest whatever else. Hey, we know what's happening. Someone complained of X, Y, whatever it might be, and we can now kind of address that accordingly if needed. So these are things that I think are more of a priority than some of the other stuff. Now, the next question here is, and then we're going to kind of end on this last part here, is like, and we'll talk more about it in the next episode, but like, how much is design important? Now, this is a enormous rabbit hole that I think someone can kind of go down, if you really wanted to, of like, how much does this matter, and how much do I need to invest in, both time, maybe money, maybe manpower, into the design of my MVP? And I'm going to give a couple different answers, and I apologize that I don't have a clear cut one, but it really depends. It really depends. I would say at no time does design need to be like, the top level, like, design, in order to get to that. So basically, design from here is actually something where I need it to be good enough to actually, again, get across like what is happening. Like, my front end needs to, be attractive enough and useful enough to actually get from A to B. I need to be able to people to understand the actions. So my user, experience and that stuff needs to be strong enough to get to that point. What it doesn't need to be, though, it doesn't have to be all of the high end, more fancy looking design. It doesn't have to be slick. It doesn't have to be super modern. It doesn't have to have something unique. The design, that stuff can come later. Because I'm at a point here with my MVP is I'm just trying to show, can I go from here to here to success, right? And so I need my design. I need some design there. I absolutely do, but I don't need to spend a ton of time on it. This is a great place, though, to if you are not good at, and this is something that really should try to be honest with yourself on. If you're not good at design, if user experience or UX is not something that's your strong suit, maybe you don't have any experience really in it, it's good to maybe have a conversation with a designer that is, again, just like an introductory thing. They don't have to have them do a bunch of work for you or anything else like that. I just need to have enough information of like, hey, I'm thinking, can we bounce some basic ideas off each other, or look at a bare minimum, if you don't want to spend any money on design, is like, look at what are other things that are in your space doing design wise, and then say, okay, can I at least do a bare minimum of this? And the reason why that's important is because, again, we're just trying to show, like, does my idea make sense? Can I execute it on? Do other people understand it? And so if these are my three things right here, then I really just care about, again, the design has to be good enough to be able to do that. If the design doesn't actually show that, if the design does not actually fit into, those pieces, right, of like, okay, I don't really see the idea because it's too basic, right? Like, you just have buttons on a website, and if I just have buttons on a website, okay, that's not good enough. So I need some design here. I need to show some kind of user experience, and then like the execution part, like, again, this is kind of mixed because it depends on like what my functionality is. If all my functionality is happening on the back end, I don't need design for that, right? I don't need design for having, APIs on the back end that are handling all the kinds of logic for my front end, things like that. So that's where I really want to emphasize that, like, your design has to be considerate of like, what are you trying to actually do? What do I have to show for my idea? And are people going to be able to understand it well enough of what's coming out of my front end? Okay. So with that, on that point, right, I've now considered a few different things here, right? Of, you know, to get to an MVP is I need to have a front end. Again, even if I'm trying to build a mobile app, maybe I start with a website just that shows what I'm trying to do instead of actually deploying mobile apps. What is the functionality that I want to get across, right? So part two of that is the actions, right? Can they be real? Are they real? Or can they just be mocked? And again, it depends on who is my audience. So maybe we should actually add this in here too. Is who, because depending on who my audience is, um, I maybe really need to focus on it being real, and not mocked, or vice versa. Number three, though, here, and again, this is something that often gets missed, is what are the feedback mechanisms for when people are actually using my MVP? Okay. How do they submit a ticket? How do they actually do some logging? How am I actually logging stuff? How do I know when someone's using the app? How do I know when someone has a problem? Can I actually go back in time and see, hey, if someone puts in a ticket on Saturday night, can I go back to Saturday night and see what actually was happening on the app? If you can't do that, then that's a problem that I'm not going to be able to actually solve. I'm not going to be able to, better troubleshoot. How do I fix this and how do I address this? And so for me, I want to make sure that even though the user doesn't see this, this needs to be part of my MVP if my audience is my initial user base. Okay. If my audience is just an investor, right? So then, okay, sure. If I'm just showing this to investors and I'm just doing I'm going to conferences and showing it at a booth. Sure, I don't really maybe need this part. Maybe the tickets part, it's nice so people can give me feedback separately, and not right then and there. But otherwise, I don't really need all that other stuff. But what I do need is, since I'm putting it into regular users' hands, I need ways to know what's happened on the app. So this is the initial parts of an MVP. Next episode, we're going to talk a little bit further about, how do I start to, again, break down these decisions a little bit further? How do I start to actually build some of this stuff? What are some different tools and ways that we can actually execute on building this MVP and get that out the door? It's going to pull back in some of the stuff too we talked about with like app architecture and things like that. Couple different things here. Started up a group, a Telegram group for this. So if you are watching this stream later and you have questions, you can come to that group and you can ask questions then. So again, this, as I mentioned in the very first episode, this whole experience is kind of an experiment. We are trying some different things. So as you've already seen, like we've actually changed to be kind of wide, even though we're trying to focus on mobile. Some of the feedback kind of fit better if we actually were focused on being able to have the widescreen, allowed us to better stream to some other things. So that was part of our experimenting. We're going to keep taking questions. You can come to that group and ask some questions there, and just kind of focus on, again, what's happened in this episode. So if you missed something, you can't watch it actually live, but you want to talk through something, you can do that there. We will also have some other really specific events and some actions that I encourage people to make sure that they are completing and doing, because this is all going to, as I said in the first couple episodes, these things are going to add up into something that's going to be a little bit larger, that I think is going to be hopefully fun for people who've been kind of following along and learning and things like that. Lastly, if you have a topic idea and you have something that you want to have come up as well, you can, on any one of the different socials that you are watching this on, you can actually just send a message there. You can come to the Telegram group and you can message there, and give suggestions and different ideas, and we will talk about that. We're focusing a lot right now on like MVP and things like that. We are going to talk a little bit more in the future, sometimes about different technologies. We're going to talk about how to implement some different things into your stack. We're going to talk about actually building. We're talking about things of like support, design, all different things that go into actually shipping products, right? So not just about coding and being a good developer, but actually getting stuff out the door into production and getting users using your product. I really appreciate everyone coming out. Please share this if you felt this is helpful. Make sure that that we are you're asking the questions that you need to have answered for yourself. We want to make this useful for everyone, so I really appreciate all of that. We will be back tomorrow morning with the next part of this and some other things. So you can always come back and ask questions then as well. So again, all the replays are available on the DevHub YouTube channel. So again, wherever you're watching this, all the socials are linked there. You can go right from there and you can see that. And if you haven't already claimed, this will probably be the last week that I actively promote this. So hint, this might be a good thing to actually go and grab as part of this process. And again, thank you so much for taking the time with me, for joining me this morning. We're going to keep experimenting and keep trying some different things. And we will be back tomorrow with more stuff about called part 2 of the MVP and what it means to actually ship it and get feedback from it. But until then, I appreciate your time and joining me this morning. Keep building and keep shipping. Thanks all.